Lives of the Most Eminent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects by Giorgio Vasari.
Michele Sanmichele, who was born at Verona in the year 1484, and learned the first principles of architecture from his father Giovanni and his uncle Bartolomeo, both excellent architects, went off at 16 years of age to Rome, leaving his father and two brothers of fine parts, one of whom, called Jacopo, devoted himself to letters, and the other, named Don Camillo, was a canon regular and general of that order. Having arrived there, he studied the ancient remains of architecture in such a manner, and with such diligence, observing and measuring everything minutely, that in a short time he became renowned and famous not only in Rome, but throughout all the places that are around that city. Moved by his fame, the people of Orvieto summoned him as architect to their celebrated temple, with an honorable salary. And while he was employed in their service, he was summoned for the same reason to Montefiascone, as architect for the building of their principal temple. And thus, serving both the one and the other of these places, he executed all that there is to be seen in these two cities in the way of good architecture. Among other works, a most beautiful tomb was built after his design in San Domenico at Montefiascone, I believe for one of the Petrucci, a nobleman of Siena, which cost a great sum of money, and proved to be marvelous. Besides all this, he made an infinite number of designs for private houses in those places, and made himself known as a man of great judgment and excellence. Thereupon, Pope Clement VII, proposing to make use of him in the most important operations of the wars that were stirring at that time throughout all Italy, gave him as a companion to Antonio da San Gallo with a very good salary, to the end that they might go together to inspect all the places of greatest importance in the states of the Church, and wherever necessary might see to the construction of fortifications, above all at Parma and Piacenza, because those two cities were most distant from Rome, and nearest and most exposed to the perils of war. Which duty having been executed by Michele and Antonio to the full satisfaction of the pontiff, there came to Michele a desire after all those years to revisit his native city and his relatives and friends, and even more to see the fortresses of the Venetians. Wherefore, after he had been a few days in Verona, he went to Treviso to see the fortress there, and then to Padua for the same purpose. But the Signory of Venice, having been warned of this, became suspicious that Sanmichele might be going about inspecting those fortresses with a hostile intent. Having therefore been arrested at Padua at their command and thrown into prison, he was examined at great length, but when it was found that he was an honest man, he was not only liberated by them, but also entreated that he should consent to enter the service of those same Signory of Venice, with honorable rank and salary. He excused himself by saying that he was not able to do that for the present, being engaged to His Holiness, but he gave them fair promises, and then took his leave of them. Now he had not been away long, when he was forced to depart from Rome. To such purpose did those Signori go to work in order to secure him, and to go, with the gracious leave of the Pope, whom he first satisfied in full, to serve those most illustrious noblemen his natural lords. Abiding with them, he gave soon enough a proof of his judgment and knowledge by making at Verona, after many difficulties which the work appeared to present, a very strong and beautiful bastion, which gave infinite satisfaction to those Signori, and to the Lord Duke of Urbino, their Captain General. After these things, the same Signori, having determined to fortify Legnago and Porto, places most important to their dominion, and situated upon the river Adige, one on one side and the other on the opposite side, but joined by a bridge, commissioned Sanmichele to show them by means of a model how it appeared to him that those places could and should be fortified, which having been done by him, his design gave infinite satisfaction to the Signori and to the Duke of Urbino. Whereupon, arrangements having been made for all that had to be done, Sanmichele executed the fortifications of those two places in such a manner that among works of that kind there is nothing better to be seen, or more beautiful, or more carefully considered, or stronger, as whoever has seen them well knows. This done, he fortified in the Bresciano, almost from the foundations, Orzi Nuovo, a fortress and port similar to Legnago. Sanmichele being then sought for with great insistence by Signor Francesco Sforza, last Duke of Milan, the Signori consented to grant him leave, but for 3 months only. Having therefore gone to Milan, he inspected all the fortresses of that state, and gave directions in every place for all that it seemed to him necessary to do, and that with such credit and so much to the satisfaction of the Duke, that His Excellency, besides thanking the Signori of Venice, presented 500 crowns to Sanmichele. And with this occasion, before returning to Venice, Michele went to Casale di Monferrato, in order to see that very strong and beautiful fortress and city, the architecture of which was the work of Matteo Sanmichele, an excellent architect, his cousin, and also an honored and very beautiful tomb of marble erected in San Francesco in the same city, likewise under the direction of Matteo. Having then returned home, he had no sooner arrived than he was sent with the above-named Duke of Urbino to inspect La Chiusa, a fortress and pass of much importance above Verona, and then all the places in Friuli, Bergamo, Vicenza, Peschiera, and others, of all which, and of what seemed to him to be required, he gave minute information in writing to the Signori. Having next been sent by the same Signori to Dalmatia to fortify the cities and other places of that province, he inspected everything, and carried out restorations with great diligence wherever he saw the necessity to be greatest. And since he could not himself dispatch all the work, he left there Gian Girolamo his kinsman, who, after fortifying Zara excellently well, erected from the foundations the marvellous fortress of San Nicolo over the mouth of the harbour of Šibenik. Meanwhile, Michele was sent in great haste to Corfu, and restored the fortress there in many parts. And he did the same in all the places in Cyprus and Candia. Even so, not long afterwards, on account of a fear that the island might be lost by reason of the war with the Turks which was imminent, he was forced to return there, after having inspected the fortresses of the Venetian dominion in Italy, to fortify with incredible rapidity Canea, Candia, Retimo, and Setia, but particularly Canea and Candia, which he rebuilt from the foundations and made impregnable. Napoli de Romagna being then besieged by the Turks, what with the diligence of Sanmichele in fortifying it and furnishing it with bastions, and the valor of Agostino Cesoni of Verona, a very valiant captain, in defending it with arms, it was not after all taken by the enemy or forced to surrender. These wars finished, Sanmichele went with the magnificent Messer Tommaso Mozzenigo, Captain General of the fleet, to fortify Corfu once again, and they then returned to Sebenico, where the diligence of Gian Girolamo, shown by him in constructing the above-mentioned fortress of San Nicolo, was much commended. Sanmichele, having then returned to Venice, where he was much extolled for the works executed in the Levant in the service of that republic, the Signory resolved to build a fortress on the Lido at the mouth of the port of Venice. Wherefore, giving the charge of this to Sanmichele, they said to him that, if he had done such great things far away from Venice, he should think how much it was his duty to do in a work of such importance, which was to lie forever under the eyes of the Senate and of so many great lords, and that in addition, besides beauty and strength in the work, there was expected of him particular industry in founding truly and well in a marshy spot, which was surrounded on all sides by the sea, and exposed to the ebb and flow of the tide, a pile of such importance. Sanmichele, having therefore not only made a very beautiful and solid model, but also considered the method of laying the foundations and carrying it into effect, orders were given to him that he should set his hand to the work without delay. Whereupon, after receiving from those Signori all that was required, he prepared the materials for filling in the foundations, and besides this, caused great numbers of piles to be sunk in double rows, and then, with a vast number of persons well acquainted with those waters, he set himself to make the excavations, and to contrive by means of pumps and other instruments to keep the water pumped out, which was seen continually rising from below, because the site was in the sea. One morning, finally, resolving to make a supreme effort to begin the foundations, and assembling as many men fit for the purpose as could be obtained, with all the porters of Venice and many of the Signori being present, in a moment, with incredible assiduity and promptitude, the waters were mastered for a little to such purpose, that the first stones of the foundations were thrown instantly upon the piles already driven in, which stones, being very large, took up much space and made an excellent foundation. And so, continuing to keep the water pumped out without losing any time, almost in a flash those foundations were laid, contrary to the expectation of many who had looked upon that work as absolutely impossible. The foundations, when finished, were allowed sufficient time to settle, and then Michele erected upon them a mighty and marvelous fortress, building it on the outer side all in rustic work, with very large stones from Istria, which are of an extreme hardness, and able to withstand wind, frost, and the worst of weather. Wherefore that fortress, besides being marvelous with regard to the site on which it is built, is also, from the beauty of the masonry and from its incredible cost, one of the most stupendous that there are in Europe at the present day, rivaling the grandeur and majesty of the most famous edifices erected by the greatness of the Romans. For, besides other things, it appears as if made all from one block, and as though a mountain of living rock had been carved and given that form. So large are the blocks of which it is built, and so well joined and united together, not to speak of the ornaments and other things that are there, seeing that one would never be able to say enough to do them justice. Within it, Michele afterwards made a piazza, divided by pilasters and arches of the rustic order, which would have proved to be a very rare work if it had not been left unfinished. This vast pile having been carried to the condition that has been described, Some malign and envious persons said to the Signoria that, although it was very beautiful and built with every possible consideration, nevertheless it would be useless for any purpose, and perhaps even dangerous, for the reason that on discharging the artillery, on account of the great quantity and weight of artillery that the place required, it was almost inevitable that the edifice should split open and fall to the ground. It therefore appeared to those prudent signori that it would be well to make certain of this, the matter being one of great importance, and they caused to be taken there a vast quantity of artillery, the heaviest that could be found in the arsenal. Then all the embrasures, both above and below, having been filled with cannon, and the cannon charged more heavily than was usual, they were all fired off together, whereupon such were the noise, the thunder, and the earthquake that resulted, that it seemed as if the world had burst to pieces, and the fortress, with all those flaming cannon, had the appearance of a volcano and of hell itself. But for all that, the building stood firm in its former strength and solidity, whereby the Senate was convinced of the great worth of Sanmichele, and the evil speakers were put to scorn as men of little judgment, although they had put such terror into everyone, that the ladies then pregnant, fearing some great disaster, had withdrawn from Venice. Not long afterwards, a place of no little importance on the coast near Venice, called Murano, having returned under the dominion of the Venetians, was restored and fortified with promptitude and diligence under the direction of Sanmichele. And about the same time, the fame of Michele and of his kinsman Gian Girolamo spreading ever more widely, they were requested many times, both the one and the other, to go to live with the Emperor Charles V and with King Francis of France. But although they were invited under most honorable conditions, they would not leave their own masters to enter into the service of foreigners. Indeed, continuing in their offices, they went about inspecting and restoring every year, wherever it was necessary, all the cities and fortresses of the state of Venice. But more than all the rest did Michele fortify and adorn his native city of Verona, making there, besides other things, those most beautiful gates of the city, which have no equal in any other place. One was the Porta Nuova, all in the Dorico-rustic order, which in its solidity and massive firmness corresponds to the strength of the site, being all built of tufa and pietra viva, and having within it rooms for the soldiers who mount guard there, and many other conveniences never before added to that kind of building. That edifice, which is quadrangular and open above, serving with its embrasures as a cavalier, defends two great bastions, or rather towers, which stand one on either side of the gate at proper distances, and all is done with so much judgment, cost, and magnificence, that no one thought that for the future there could be executed any work of greater grandeur or better design, even as none such had been seen in the past. But a few years afterwards, the same Sanmichele founded and carried upwards the gate commonly called the Porta del Palio, which is in no way inferior to that described above, but equally beautiful, grand, and magnificent, or even more so, and designed excellently well. And in truth, in these two gates, the Signory of Venice may be seen to have equaled, by means of the genius of this architect, the edifices and fabrics of the ancient Romans. This last gate, then, is on the outer side of the Doric order, with immense projecting columns, all fluted according to the manner of that order. And these columns, which are 8 in all, are placed in pairs. 4 serve to enclose the gate, with the arms of the rectors of the city between one and another on either side, and the other 4, likewise in pairs, make a finish to the angles of the gate, the facade of which is very wide and all of bosses, or rather blocks, not rough but made smooth, with very beautiful ornamentation. And the opening, or rather passage, through the gate is left quadrangular, but of an architecture that is new, bizarre, and most beautiful. Above it is a great and very rich Doric cornice with all its appurtenances, over which, as may be seen from the model, was to go a fronton with all its ornaments, forming a parapet for the artillery, since this gate, like the other, was to serve as a cavalier. Within the gate are very large rooms for the soldiers, with other apartments and conveniences. On the front that faces towards the city, Sanmichele made a most beautiful loggia, all of the Dorico-rustic order on the outer side, and on the inner all in rustic work, with very large piers that have as ornaments columns round on the outside, and on the inside square and projecting to the half of their thickness, and all made of pieces in rustic masonry, with Doric capitals without bases, and at the top is a great cornice, likewise Doric, and carved, passing along the whole loggia, which is of great length, both within and without. In a word, this work is marvelous, wherefore it was well and truly spoken by the most illustrious Signor Sforza Pallavicino, Captain General of the Venetian forces, when he said that there was not to be found in all Europe any structure that could in any way compare with it. This was the last of Michele's marvels, for the reason that he had scarcely erected the whole of the first range described above, when he finished the course of his life. Wherefore the work remained unfinished, nor will it ever be finished at all, for there are not wanting certain malignant persons, as always happens with great works, who censure it, striving to diminish the glory of others by their malignity and evil speaking, since they fail by a great measure to achieve similar things with their own powers. The same master built another gate at Verona called the Porta di San Zeno, which is very beautiful. In any other place, indeed, it would be marvelous, but in Verona its beauty and artistry are obscured by the 2 others described above. A work of Michele's, likewise, is the bastion, or rather rampart, that is near this gate, and also another that is lower down, opposite to San Bernardino, and another between them called del Acqueo, which is opposite to the Campo Marzio, and also that surpassing all the others in size, which is placed by the chain where the Adige enters the city. At Padua he built the bastion called the Coronaro, and likewise that of San Croce, which are both of marvelous size, and constructed in the modern manner, according to the order invented by Michele himself. For the method of making bastions with angles was the invention of Michele, and before his day they were made round. And whereas that kind of bastion was very difficult to defend at the present day, having an obtuse angle on the outer side, they can be defended with ease, either from the cavalier erected between the 2 bastions and near to them, or indeed from the other bastion, provided that it be near the one attacked and the ditch wide. His invention also was the method of making bastions with 3 platforms, whereby the 2 at the sides guard and defend the ditch and the curtains with their open embrasures, and the merlon in the center defends itself and attacks the enemy in front. This method of fortification has since been imitated by everyone, causing the abandonment of the ancient fashion of subterranean embrasures called casemates, in which, on account of the smoke and other impediments, the artillery could not be well handled, not to mention that they often weakened the foundations of the towers and walls. The same Michele built two very beautiful gates at Legnago. He directed at Peschiera the work of the first foundation of that fortress, and likewise many works at Brescia. And he always did everything with such diligence and such good foundations that not one of his buildings ever showed a crack. Finally, he restored the fortress of La Chiusa above Verona, making it possible for persons to pass by without entering the fortress, but yet in such a manner that, on the raising of a bridge by those who are within, no one can pass by against their will, or even show himself on the road, which is very narrow and cut out of the rock. He also built at Verona, just after he had returned from Rome, the very beautiful bridge over the Adige, called the Ponte Nuovo, doing this at the commission of Messer Giovanni Emo, at that time podesta of that city, which bridge was, on account of its strength, as it still is, a marvelous thing. Michele was excellent not only in fortifications, but also in private buildings and in temples, churches, and monasteries, as may be seen from many buildings at Verona and other places, and particularly from the most ornate and beautiful Chapel of the Guareschi in San Bernardino, which is round after the manner of a temple, and in the Corinthian order, with all the ornaments which that manner admits. That chapel, I say, he built all of that white pietra viva, which, from the sound that it makes when it is being worked, is called in that city bronzo. And in truth, that kind of stone, after fine marble, is the most beautiful that has been found down to our own times, being absolutely solid and without holes or spots that might spoil it. Since that chapel, then, is built on the inside all of that most beautiful stone, and wrought by excellent masters of carving, and put together very well, it is considered that among works of that kind there is at the present day no other more beautiful in all Italy. For Michele made the whole work curve in a circle in such a manner that 3 altars which are in it, with their pediments and cornices, and likewise the space of the door, all turn in a perfect round, almost after the likeness of the entrances that Filippo Brunelleschi made in the chapels of the Temple of the Angeli in Florence, which is a very difficult thing to do. Michele then made therein a gallery over the first range of columns, which circles right round the chapel, and there are to be seen most beautiful carvings in the form of columns, capitals, foliage, grotesques, little pilasters, and other things, carved with incredible diligence. The door of that chapel he made quadrangular on the outer side, of the Corinthian order, and very beautiful, and similar to an ancient door that he saw, so he used to say, in some place at Rome. It is true indeed that this work, after having been left unfinished by Michele, I know not for what reason, was given, either from avarice or from lack of judgment, to certain others to be finished, who spoiled it, to the infinite vexation of Michele, who in his lifetime saw it ruined before his very eyes, without being able to prevent it. Wherefore he used to complain at times to his friends, but only on this account, that he had not thousands of ducats wherewith to buy it from the avaricious hands of a woman, who, by spending less than she was able, was shamefully spoiling it. A work of Michele's, was the design of the round Temple of the Madonna di Campagna near Verona, which was very beautiful, although the parsimony, weakness, and little judgment of the wardens of that building have since disfigured it in many parts. And even worse would they have done if Bernardino Brugnoli, a kinsman of Michele, had not had charge of it and made a complete model, after which the building of that temple, as well as of many others, is now being carried forward. For the friars of Santa Maria in Organo, or rather the monks of Monte Alavito in Verona, he made a design of the Corinthian order, which was most beautiful, for the façade of their church. This façade, after being carried to a certain height by Paolo Sanmichele, was left not long since in that condition, on account of many expenses that were incurred by those monks in other matters, but even more by reason of the death of him who had begun it, Don Cipriano of Verona, a man of saintly life and of much authority in that order, of which he was twice general. At San Giorgio in Verona, a convent of the regular priests of San Giorgio in Aliga, the same Michele directed the building of the cupola of that church, which was a very beautiful work, and succeeded against the expectations of many who did not think that the structure would ever remain standing, on account of the weakness of its supports. But these were then so strengthened by Michele that there was no longer anything to fear. In the same convent he made the design and laid the foundations of a very beautiful campanile of hewn stone, partly tufa and partly pietra viva, which was carried well forward by him, and is now being continued by the above-mentioned Bernardino, his nephew, who is employed in carrying it to completion. Monsignor Luigi Lippomani, Bishop of Verona, having resolved to carry to completion the campanile of his church, which had been begun 100 years before, caused a design for this to be made by Michele, who did it very beautifully, taking into consideration the preserving of the old part and the expense that the bishop was able to incur. But a certain Messer Domenico Porzio, a Roman, and his vicar, a person with little knowledge of building, although otherwise a worthy man, allowed himself to be imposed upon by one who also knew little about it, and gave him the charge of carrying on that fabric. Whereupon that person built it of unprepared stone from the mountains, and made the stairs in the thickness of the walls, doing all this in such a manner that everyone who was even slightly conversant with architecture foretold that which afterwards happened, namely, that the structure would not remain standing. And, among others, the very Reverend Fra Marco de' Medici of Verona, who, in addition to his other more serious studies, has always delighted in architecture, as he still does, predicted what would happen to such a building. But he was answered thus: Fra Marco counts for much in his own profession of letters, philosophy, and theology, wherein he is public lecturer, but in architecture he does not fish so deeply as to command belief. Finally, that campanile, having risen to the level where the bells were to be, opened out in 4 parts in such a manner that, after having spent many thousands of crowns in building it, they had to give 300 crowns to the builders to throw it to the ground, lest it should fall by itself, as it would have done in a few days, and destroy everything all around. And it is only right that this should happen to those who desert good and eminent masters and mix themselves up with bunglers. The above-named Monsignor Luigi, having afterwards been chosen Bishop of Bergamo, Monsignor Agostino Lippomani was made Bishop of Verona in his place, and he commissioned Michele to reconstruct almost anew the model of that campanile, and to set to work. and after him, according to the same model, Monsignor Girolamo Trevisani, a friar of San Dominic, who succeeded the last named Lippomani in the bishopric, has caused that work to be continued, which is now progressing, passing slowly. The model is very beautiful, and the stairs are being accommodated within the tower in such a manner that the fabric remains stable and very strong. For the noble Counts della Torre of Verona, Michele built a very beautiful chapel in the manner of a round temple, with the altar in the center, at their villa of Fiumane. And in the church of the Santo at Padua, a very handsome tomb was built under his direction for Messer Alessandro Contarini, procurator of St. Mark, who had been proveditor to the Venetian forces, in which tomb it would seem that Michele sought to show in what manner such works should be done, departing from a kind of commonplace method which, in his opinion, had in it more of the altar or chapel than of the tomb. This work, which is very rich in ornamentation, solid in composition, and warlike in character, has as ornaments a Thetis and 2 prisoners by the hand of Alessandro Vittoria, which are held to be good figures, and a head, or rather effigy from life, of the above-named lord, with armor on the breast, executed in marble by Denisi da Carrara. There are, in addition, other ornaments in abundance, prisoners, trophies, spoils of war, and others, of which there is no need to make mention. In Venice he made the model of the convent of the nuns of San Biagio Cataldo, which was much extolled. It was then resolved at Verona to rebuild the lazaretto, a dwelling, or rather hospital, which serves for the sick in times of plague, the old one having been destroyed together with other edifices that had been in the suburbs, and Michele was commissioned to make a design for this, which proved to be beautiful beyond all expectations, to the end that it might be put into execution on a spot near the river, at some distance from the city and beyond the esplanade. But this design, truly most beautiful and excellently well considered in every part, which is now in the possession of the heirs of Luigi Brugnoli, Michele's nephew, was not carried completely into execution by certain persons, by reason of their little judgment and poverty of spirit, but much restricted, curtailed, and reduced to mean proportions by those persons who used the authority that they had received in the matter from the public in disfiguring the work, in consequence of the untimely death of some gentlemen who were in charge of it at the beginning, and who had a greatness of spirit equal to their nobility of blood. A work of Michele's, likewise, was the very beautiful palace that the noble counts of Canossa have at Verona, which was built at the commission of the very Reverend Monsignor de Bajus, who once was Count Lodovico Canossa, a man so much celebrated by all the writers of his time. For the same Monsignor, Michele built another magnificent palace in the villa of Grezzano, in the Veronese territory. Under the direction of the same architect, the façade of the Count's Bevilacqua was reconstructed, and all the apartments were restored in the castle of those lords, called La Bevilacqua. And at Verona likewise he built the house and façade of the Lavezzoli, which were much extolled. In Venice he built from the foundations the very rich and magnificent palace of the Cornaro family near San Polo, and restored another palace also of the Cornaro family, which is by San Benedetto al Albore, for Messer Giovanni Cornaro, of whom Michele was much the friend. and this led to Giorgio Vasari painting 9 pictures in oils for the ceiling of a magnificent apartment, all adorned with woodwork, carved and richly overlaid with gold, in that palace. In like manner, he restored the house of the Bragadini opposite to Santa Marina, and made it very commodious and ornate. And in the same city he founded and raised above the ground, after a model of his own, at incredible cost, the marvelous palace of the most noble Messer Girolamo Grimani, near Santa Luca on the Grand Canal. But Michele, being overtaken by death, was not able to carry it to completion himself, and the other architects chosen in his stead by that nobleman altered his design and model in many parts. Near Castelfranco, on the borders of the territories of Padua and Treviso, there was built under the direction of the same Michele the most famous palace of the Soranzi, called by that family La Soranza, which palace is held to be, for a country residence, the most beautiful and the most commodious that had been built in those parts up to that time. He also built the Casa Cornara at Piombino in that territory, and so many other private houses that it would make too long a story to attempt to speak of them all. Let it be enough to have made mention of the most important. I will not indeed refrain from recording that he made most beautiful gates for 2 palaces, one of which was that of the rectors and of the captain, and the other that of the Palazzo del Podesta, both in Verona and worthy of the highest praise, although the latter, which is in the Ionic order, with double columns and very ornate intercolumniations, and some victories at the angles, has a somewhat dwarfed appearance by reason of the lowness of the site where it stands, particularly because it is without pedestals and very wide on account of the double columns, but such was the wish of Messer Giovanni Delfini, who had it made. While Michele was enjoying a tranquil ease in his native place, and the reputation and renown that his honorable labors had brought him, there came to him a piece of news that so afflicted him that it finished the course of his life. But to the end that the whole may be better understood, and that all the beautiful works of the Sanmichele family may be made known in this life, I shall say something of Gian Girolamo, the kinsman of Michele. This Gian Girolamo, then, was the son of Paolo, the cousin of Michele, and being a young man of very beautiful genius, was instructed with such diligence by Michele in the matters of architecture, and so beloved by him, that he would always have the young man with him in all undertakings of importance, and particularly in fortifications. Having therefore become in a short time so excellent, with the help of such a master, that the most difficult work of fortification could be entrusted to him, in which manner of architecture he took particular delight, his ability was recognized by the Signory of Venice, and he was placed with a good salary among the number of their architects, although he was very young, and then sent now to one place and now to another to inspect and restore the fortresses of their dominion, and at times to carry into execution the designs of his kinsman Michele. And, among other places, he took part with much judgment and labor in the fortification of Zara, and in the marvelous fortress of San Nicolo at Sebenico, placed, as has been mentioned, at the mouth of the port, which fortress, erected by him from the very foundations, is held to be, for a private fortress, one of the strongest and best designed that there are to be seen. He also reconstructed after his own designs, with the advice of his kinsman, the great fortress of Corfu, which is considered the key of Italy on that side. In this fortress, I say, Gian Girolamo rebuilt the two great towers that face towards the land, making them much larger and stronger than they were before, with open embrasures and platforms that flank the ditch in the modern manner, after the invention of his kinsman. He then caused the ditches to be made much wider than they were before, and had a hill levelled, which, being near the fortress, appeared to command it. But, besides the many other works that he did there with great consideration, what gave most satisfaction was that in one corner of the fortress he made a place of great size and strength, in which in time of siege the people of that island can stay in safety without any danger of being captured by the enemy. On account of these works, Gian Girolamo came into such credit with the above-named signori that they ordained him a salary equal to that of his kinsman, judging him to be not inferior to Michele, and even superior in that work of fortification, which gave the greatest contentment to Sanmichele, who saw his own art advancing in the person of his relative in proportion as old age was taking away from himself the power to go further. Gian Girolamo, besides his great judgment in recognizing the nature of different sites, showed much industry in having them represented by designs and models in relief, insomuch that he enabled his patrons to see even the most minute details of his fortifications in very beautiful models of wood that he would cause to be made, which diligence pleased them vastly, for without leaving Venice they saw every day how matters were proceeding in the most distant parts of their state. In order that they might be the more readily seen by everyone, these models were kept in the Palazzo del Principe, in a place where the signori could examine them at their convenience, and to the end that Gian Girolamo might continue to pursue that course, they not only reimbursed him the expenses that he incurred in making the above-mentioned models, but also showed him many other courtesies. Gian Girolamo could have gone to serve many lords with large salaries, but he would never leave his Venetian signori. Nay, at the advice of his father and his kinsman Michele, he took a wife in Verona, a noble young woman of the Fracastoro family, with the intention of always living in those parts. But he had been not more than a few days with his beloved bride, who was called Madonna Ortensia, when he was summoned by his patrons to Venice, and thence sent in great haste to Cyprus to inspect every place in that island, orders having been given to all the officials that they should provide him with all that he might require for any purpose. Having then arrived in that island, in 3 months Gian Girolamo went all round it, and diligently inspected everything, putting every detail into writing and drawing, in order to be able to give an account of the whole to his masters. But while he was attending with too much care and solicitude to his office, paying little regard to his own life, in the burning heat which prevailed at that time in the island, he fell sick of a pestilential fever, which robbed him of life in 6 days, although some said that he had been poisoned. However that may have been, he died content in being in the service of his masters, and employed by them in works of importance, knowing that they had trusted more in his fidelity and his skill in fortification than in those of any other man. The moment that he fell sick, knowing that he was dying, he gave all the drawings and writings that he had prepared on the works in that island into the hands of the architect Luigi Brugnoli, his kinsman by marriage, who was then engaged in the fortification of Famagosta, which is the key of that kingdom, to the end that he might carry them to his masters. When the news of Gian Girolamo's death arrived in Venice, there was not one of the Senate who did not feel indescribable sorrow at the loss of such a man, who had been so devoted to that republic. Gian Girolamo died at the age of 45, and received honorable burial from his above-named kinsman in San Nicolo at Famagosta. Then, having returned to Venice, Brugnoli presented Gian Girolamo's drawings and writings, which done, he was sent to give completion to the fortifications of Legnago, where he had spent many years in executing the designs and models of his uncle. But he had not been long in that place when he died, leaving two sons, who are men of passing good ability in design and in the practice of architecture. Bernardino, the elder, has now many undertakings on his hands, such as the building of the campanile of the Duomo, that of San Giorgio, and that of the church called the Madonna di Campagna, in which and other works that he is directing at Verona and other places, he is succeeding excellently well, and particularly in the ornamental work of the principal chapel of San Giorgio at Verona, which is of the composite order, and such that in size, design, and workmanship the people of Verona declare that they do not believe that there is one equal to it to be found in Italy. This work, which follows the curve of the recess, is of the Corinthian order, with composite capitals and double columns in full relief, and pilasters behind. In like manner, the frontispiece which surmounts the whole also curves in very masterly fashion according to the shape of the recess, and has all the ornaments which that order embraces. Wherefore Monsignor Barbaro, Patriarch-elect of Aquileia, a man with a great knowledge of the profession, who has written of it, on his return from the Council of Trent, saw not without marvel all that had been done in that work, and that which was being done every day, and after considering it several times, he had to say that he had never seen the like, and that nothing better could be done. And let this suffice as a proof of what may be expected from the genius of Bernardino, who was born on the mother's side from the Sanmichele family. But let us return to Michele, from whom we digressed, not without reason, some little time back. He was struck by such grief at the death of Gian Girolamo, in whom he saw the house of Sammichele become extinct, since his kinsman left no children, that, although he strove to conquer or conceal it, in a few days he was overcome by a malignant fever, to the inconsolable sorrow of his country and of his most illustrious patrons. Michele died in the year 1559, and was buried at San Tommaso, a church of Carmelite friars, where there is the ancient burial place of his forefathers. And at the present day, Messer Niccolò Sanmichele, a physician, has set his hand to erecting him an honorable tomb, which is even now being carried into execution. Michele was a man of most upright life, and most honorable in his every action. He was a cheerful person, yet with an admixture of seriousness. He feared God, and was very religious, insomuch that he would never set himself to do anything in the morning without having first heard Mass devoutly and said his prayers. And at the beginning of any undertaking of importance, in the morning, before doing any other thing, he would always have the Mass of the Holy Spirit or of the Madonna solemnly chanted. He was very liberal, and so courteous with his friends that they were as much masters of his possessions as he was himself. And I will not withhold a proof of his great loyalty and goodness, which I believe few others know besides myself. When Giorgio Vasari, of whom, as has been told, he was much the friend, parted from him for the last time in Venice, Michele said to him, "I would have you know, Messer Giorgio, that, when I was in my youth at Montefiascone, I became enamoured, as fortune would have it, of the wife of a stone cutter, and received from her complaisance all that I desired, but no one ever heard of it from me. Now, having heard that the poor woman has been left a widow, with a daughter ready for a husband, whom she says she conceived by me, I wish, although it may well be that this is not true, and such is my belief, that you should take to her these 50 crowns of gold, and give them to her on my part, for the love of God, to the end that she may use them for her advantage, and settle her daughter according to her station. Giorgio, therefore, going to Rome and arriving at Montefiascone, although the good woman freely confessed to him that the girl was not the daughter of Michele, insisted, in obedience to Michele's command, on paying her the 50 crowns, which were as welcome to that poor woman as 500 would have been to another. Michele, then, was courteous beyond the courtesy of any other man, insomuch that he no sooner heard of the needs and desires of his friends than he sought to gratify them, even to the spending of his life. Nor did any person ever do him a service that was not repaid many times over. Giorgio Vasari once made for him in Venice, with the greatest diligence at his command, a large drawing in which the proud Lucifer and his followers, vanquished by the angel Michael, could be seen raining headlong down from heaven into the horrible depths of hell. And at that time Michele did not do anything but thank Giorgio for it when he took leave of him. But not many days after, returning to Arezzo, Giorgio found that Sanmichele had sent long before to his mother, who lived at Arezzo, a quantity of presents, beautiful and honourable enough to be the gifts of a very rich nobleman, with a letter in which he did her great honour for love of her son. Many times the Signori of Venice offered to increase his salary, but he refused, always praying that they should increase his kinsmen's salaries instead of his own. In short, Michele was in his every action so gentle, courteous, and loving, that he made himself rightly beloved by innumerable lords. By Cardinal de' Medici, who became Pope Clement VII while he was in Rome; by Cardinal Alessandro Farnese, who became Paul III; by the divine Michelagnolo Buonarroti, by Signor Francesco Maria, Duke of Urbino, and by a vast number of noblemen and senators of Venice. At Verona he was much the friend of Fra Marco de' Medici, a man of great learning and infinite goodness, and of many others of whom there is no need at present to make mention. Now, in order not to have to turn back in a short time to speak of the Veronese, taking the opportunity presented by the masters mentioned above, I shall make mention in this place of some painters from that country who are still alive and worthy to be named, and by no means to be passed over in silence. The first of these is Domenico del Riccio, who has painted in fresco, mostly in chiaroscuro and partly in color, 3 façades of the house of Fioro della Città at Verona, on the Ponte Nuovo, that is, the 3 that do not look out upon the bridge, the house standing by itself. In one, over the river, are battles of sea monsters; in another, the battles of the centaurs and many rivers; and in the third, 2 pictures in color. In the first of these, which is over the door, is the Table of the Gods, and in the other, over the river, is the fable of the nuptials between the Benacus, called the Lake of Garda, and the nymph Charis, in the person of Garda, from whom is born the river Mincio, which in fact issues from that lake. In the same house is a large frieze wherein are some triumphs in color, executed in a beautiful and masterly manner. In the house of Messer Pellegrino Ridolfi, also at Verona, the same master painted the coronation of the Emperor Charles V, and the scene when, after being crowned in Bologna, he rides with the Pope through the city in great pomp. In oils he has painted the principal altarpiece of the church that the Duke of Mantua has built recently near the Castello, in which is the beheading and martyrdom of Saint Barbara, painted with much diligence and judgment. And what moved the Duke to have that altarpiece executed by Domenico was his having seen and much liked his manner in an altarpiece that Domenico had painted long before for the chapel of Santa Margherita in the Duomo of Mantua, in competition with Paolino, who painted that of Sant'Antonio, with Paolo Farenato, who executed that of San Martino, and with Battista del Moro, who painted that of the Magdalene, all which four Veronese had been summoned thither by Cardinal Ercoli of Mantua, in order to adorn that church, which had been reconstructed by him after the design of Giulio Romano. Other works has Domenico executed in Verona, Vicenza, and Venice, but it must suffice to have spoken of those named. He is an honest and excellent craftsman, and in addition to his painting, he is a very fine musician, and one of the first in the most noble Philharmonic Academy of Verona. Not inferior to him will be his son Felice, who, although still young, has proved himself a painter out of the ordinary in an altarpiece that he has executed for the Church of the Trinita, in which are the Madonna and 6 other saints, all of the size of life. Nor is this any marvel, for the young man learned his art in Florence, living in the house of Bernardo Canigiani, a Florentine gentleman and a crony of his father Domenico. In the same Verona also lives Bernardino, called Lindia, who, besides many other works, has painted the fable of Psyche in most beautiful figures on the ceiling of a chamber in the house of Count Marcantonio del Tiene, and he has painted another chamber with beautiful inventions and a lovely manner of painting for Count Girolamo of Canossa. A much extolled painter also is Eliodoro Forbicini, a young man of most beautiful genius and of considerable skill in every manner of painting, but particularly in making grotesques, as may be seen in the 2 chambers mentioned above, and in other places where he has worked. In like manner, Battista da Verona, who is called thus, and not otherwise, out of his own country, after having learned the first rudiments of painting from an uncle at Verona, placed himself with the excellent Tiziano in Venice, under whom he has become a very good painter. When a young man, this Battista painted in company with Paolino a hall in the palace of the paymaster and assessor Portesco at Tiene, in the territory of Vicenza, where they executed a vast number of figures, which acquired credit and repute for both the one and the other. With the same Paolino he executed many works in fresco in the palace of the Soranza at Castelfranco, both having been sent to work there by Michele Sanmichele, who loved them as his sons. And with him also he painted the façade of the house of Messer Antonio Capello, which is on the Grand Canal in Venice. And then, still together, they painted the ceiling, or rather soffit, in the hall of the Council of 10, dividing the pictures between them. Not long afterwards, having been summoned to Vicenza, Battista executed many works there, both within and around the city, and recently he has painted the façade of the Monte della Pietà, wherein he has executed an infinite number of nude figures in various attitudes, larger than life, with very good design, and all in so few months, that it has been a marvel. And if he has done so much at so early an age, for he is not yet past 30, everyone may imagine what may be expected of him in the course of his life. A Veronese likewise is one Paolino, a painter who is in very good repute in Venice at the present day, in that, although he is not yet more than 30 years of age, he has executed many works worthy of praise. This master, who was born at Verona to a stone cutter, or, as they say in those parts, a stone hewer, after having learned the rudiments of painting from Giovanni Carotto of Verona, painted in fresco, in company with the above-named Battista, the hall of the paymaster and assessor Portesco at Tiene, in the Vicentino, and afterwards at the Soranza, with the same companion, many works executed with good design and judgment, and a beautiful manner. At Masiera, near Asolo in the Trevisano, he has painted the very beautiful house of Signor Danielo Barbaro, Patriarch elect of Aquileia. At Verona, for the refectory of San Nazaro, a monastery of Black Friars, he has painted in a large picture on canvas the supper that Simon the leper gave to our Lord when the woman of sin threw herself at his feet, with many figures, portraits from life, and very rare perspective views. And under the table are two dogs so beautiful that they appear real and alive, and further away certain cripples executed excellently well. By the hand of Paolino, in the hall of the Council of Ten at Venice, in an oval that is larger than certain others that are there, placed as the principal one in the center of the ceiling, is a Jove who is driving away the vices, in order to signify that that supreme and absolute tribunal drives away vice and chastises wicked and vicious men. The same master painted the soffit, or rather ceiling, of the church of San Sebastiano, which is a very rare work, and the altarpiece of the principal chapel, together with some pictures that serve to adorn it, and likewise the doors of the organ, which are all pictures truly worthy of the highest praise. In the hall of the Grand Council he painted a large picture of Frederick Barbarossa presenting himself to the Pope, with a good number of figures varied in their costumes and vestments, all most beautiful and representing worthily the court of a Pope and an Emperor, and also a Venetian Senate, with many noblemen and senators of that republic portrayed from life. In short, this work is such in its grandeur and design, and in the beauty and variety of the attitudes, that it is rightly extolled by everyone. After this scene, Paolino painted the ceilings of certain chambers, which are used by that Council of Ten, with figures in oils, which are much foreshortened and very rare. In like manner he painted in fresco the façade of the house of a merchant, which was a very beautiful work, on the road from San Maurizio to San Moise. But the wind from the sea is little by little destroying it. For Camillo Trevisani at Murano he painted a loggia and an apartment in fresco, which were much extolled. And in San Giorgio Maggiore at Venice, at the head of a large apartment, he painted in oils the marriage of Cana in Galilee, which was a marvelous work for its grandeur, the number of figures, the variety of costumes, and the invention, and, if I remember right, there are to be seen in it more than 150 heads, all varied and executed with great diligence. The same Paolino was commissioned by the procurators of St. Mark to paint certain angular medallions that are in the ceiling of the Nicene Library, which was left to the Signoria by Cardinal Bessarion, with a vast treasure of Greek books. Now the above-named lords, when they had the painting of that library begun, promised a prize of honor, in addition to the ordinary payment, to him who should acquit himself best in painting it. And the pictures were divided among the best painters that there were at that time in Venice. When the work was finished, and the pictures painted had been very well considered, A chain of gold was placed round the neck of Paolino, he being the man who was judged to have done better than all the others. The picture that gave him the victory and the prize of honor was that wherein he painted music, in which are depicted three very beautiful young women, one of whom, the most beautiful, is playing a great bass viol, looking down at the fingerboard of the instrument, the attitude of her person showing that her ear and her voice are fixed intently on this sound, and of the other two, one is playing a lute, and the other singing from a book. Near these women is a Cupid without wings, who is playing a harpsichord, signifying that love is born from music, or rather that love is always in company with music, and because he never parts from her, Paolino made him without wings. In the same picture he painted Pan, the god, according to the poets, of shepherds with certain pipes made of the bark of trees, as it were consecrated to him as votive offerings by shepherds who have been victorious in playing them. Two other pictures Paolino painted in the same place. In one is arithmetic, with certain philosophers dressed in the ancient manner, and in the other is honor, seated on a throne, to whom sacrifices are being offered and royal crowns presented. But seeing that this young man is at this very moment at the height of his activity, and not yet in his 32nd year, I shall say nothing more of him for the present. Likewise, a Veronese is Paolo Farinato, an able painter, who, after having been a disciple of Niccolo Orsino, has executed many works at Verona. The most important are a hall in the house of the Fumanelli, which he filled with various scenes in fresco colors at the desire of Messer Antonio, a gentleman of that family, most famous as physician over all Europe, and two very large pictures in the principal chapel of Santa Maria in Organo. In one of these is the story of the Innocents, and in the other is the scene when the Emperor Constantine causes a number of children to be brought before him, intending to kill them and to bathe in their blood in order to cure himself of his leprosy. Then, in the recess of that chapel are two pictures, large but smaller than the others, in one of which is Christ receiving Saint Peter, who is walking towards him on the water, and in the other the dinner that Saint Gregory gives to certain poor men. In all these works, which are much to be extolled, is a vast number of figures executed with good design, study, and diligence. By the hand of the same master is an altar picture of San Martino that was placed in the Duomo of Mantua, which he executed in competition with others, his compatriots, as has just been related. And let this be the end of the lives of the excellent Michele Sanmichele, and of those other able men of Verona, so truly worthy of all praise on account of their excellence in the arts and their great talents.